us at parlhopecom@ttparliament.org.
This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.
Honourable Vice President.
Senator Hosein. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me the privilege to join this debate on this very important piece of legislation that is about to be amended by this government, the Valuation of Land Amendment Bill 2018, where it seeks to propose various changes to the existing parent law, the Valuation of Lands Act. And Mr. Vice President, the bill before us is about 10 pages long and 19 clauses. But this bill has very serious and dangerous effects when we look at it. It gives the Minister of Finance, Mr. Vice President, unfettered and autonomous powers. Mr. Vice President, it directly affects or interferes with the right to enjoy property. It determines the amount of money that you will be liable to pay on taxation of your property that the hard-working persons of Trinidad and Tobago work their entire life to construct so that they can enjoy. The bill, Mr. Vice President, lacks a proper analysis of the social, the political, the geographical, and the economic climate of Trinidad and Tobago. And when I listened to the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, when she piloted this bill, Mr. Vice President, I was very unenthused by the contribution because the Minister, in my opinion, was unable to properly prosecute and defend the measures that are being introduced in this amendment bill. And so much so, Mr. Vice President, that the Attorney General, and I understand he has a very busy schedule, left his office to come here in order to defend the proposals by this government. So it says a lot. It says a lot about the confidence that the Attorney General has in his colleagues to properly defend this amendment bill. And Mr. Vice President, the Attorney General, the reason why he was here this morning, or this afternoon in fact, was because he did not get a chance to debate this bill where he came from. Because, Mr. Vice President, that debate was shut down by this PNM government. It did not give the opposition a chance to properly prosecute and express their position on this bill in the lower house. So, Mr. Vice President, today I would like to speak for the members of Siparia, and today I would like to speak for the members of Faizabad and those of San Fernando East whose representatives were not allowed to voice their concerns in the House of Representatives. But one thing I must commend this independent honorable parliament for is that the Attorney General made some comments about the judiciary. And Madam President, I must commend her for her ruling because she understands the separation of powers. Madam President, the Honorable Madam President. I will address the chair, ma'am. I'm not addressing you. But, Mr. Vice President, there's a word that was being used throughout this entire debate. It was being thrown about, and that word is independent. And I went to the Oxford Dictionary. I want to get a dictionary definition of what independent means. Because the Attorney General found it fit to find himself here to defend a tribunal appointed by a minister and deem it independent. Mr. Vice President, I went to law school. I was only called to the bar about 4 years now. And I thought that I could have learned from the Attorney General the doctrine of separation of powers. But it seems that I may now have to fulfill his duty to edify the population of Trinidad and Tobago and this House of what the separation of powers actually mean. And Mr. Vice President, the dictionary definition of independent, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it means free from outside control, not subject to another's authority. That is the bottom line. So when you have a Minister of Finance who is appointing a tribunal, how can you say that is free from outside control? How can you say that is not subject to another's authority? And let me go into the specific clauses which establishes the Valuation Tribunal. It adds a new section to the bill, subsection 25A. And it says that the Valuation Tribunal shall consist of a chairperson who shall be an attorney at law with 10 years or more experience as an attorney at law. Now, I have no problem with that. 2 other persons of whom shall have wide knowledge and experience in the valuation of property. Now, I have an issue with that. I will come to that a little later. But the most alarming clause in this entire section is subsection 3. The members of the Valuation Tribunal shall be appointed by the minister. Mr. Vice President, how can that be an independent tribunal? But section 25A, clause 25A of the bill, what it does, it removes the powers of the Tax Appeal Board, an independent board. According to the Tax Appeal Board, it has the same effect or the same status as a court of superior record. And for the population who's listening, a court of superior record is what we could deem the high court. It is where a judge sits, an independent judge who is appointed by an independent service commission, the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. But who makes the appointment here? The Minister of Finance, a political appointee. And then when we look at the protection that members of the Tax Appeal Board are provided with, is that they can only be removed by whom? The Judicial and Legal Service Commission, after thorough investigation and the processes involved there. And we know in this country how difficult it is to remove a judge. And there's a case on this, the case of Creese against Crane. But in this case, do you know who appoints? Again, and I keep re-emphasizing this point, it's the Minister of Finance. But you know what the Minister of Finance can also do? He can suspend a member of the Valuation Tribunal. But according to the Interpretation Act of this country, when a person is given the power of appointment, according to Section 39 of that Act, they are also given the power to remove that person. They are given the power to reinstate that person on his suspension or reappoint him on his removal, his resignation, the expiration of his office, or otherwise. That person who appoints also has the power, this is very important, Mr. Vice President, to fix or vary his remuneration, to withhold his remuneration in whole or in part during any period of suspension from office, and to terminate his remuneration on his removal from office. So this begs the question, if someone files an objection with the Valuation Tribunal, and the political appointees sit in that tribunal, and they don't make a decision that any Minister of Finance doesn't like, does it mean that the Minister of Finance now can suspend this person or withhold his remuneration? How can we say that this Valuation Tribunal is an independent body? That cannot be, Mr. Vice President, in any civilized society with respect for the democracy. Now, when you look at the jurisdiction and the powers given to the Valuation Tribunal, do you know that this Valuation Tribunal exercises the exact same function as the Tax Appeal Board? The Tax Appeal Board, Mr. Vice President, is a court of superior record. Yet, a Valuation Tribunal that is going to be set up by a Minister of Finance is exercising the same power of that board, inclusive of additional powers. It also allows the tribunal that they can correct valuation rules, that land should not be included in the valuation rules, and lands that are omitted to reinstate those lands. And Mr. Vice President, we on this side are objecting strongly to any appointment to an independent judicial body by any political appointee. We simply do not trust them, Mr. Vice President. And the citizens of this country do not trust the government. Because you are not assisting the people. You are not sharing the burden. You are burdening the citizens of this country with taxes after taxes after taxes. And this valuation bill is what lays the foundation for the dreaded property tax. But just like in 2009, when the citizens of this country ask the tax, they will ask the PNM. It is coming very soon. But the Attorney General made a lot of song and dance about this celebrated case, Hines against the Queen. It's one of the most foundational cases with respect to the doctrine of separation of powers. And that is right. That case, it was a Privy Council decision whereby the Privy Council, they found that there must be separation of powers where there's respect for democracy in any civilized society, so that the executive exercises executive powers, that the judiciary exercises judicial powers, and that the legislature exercises legislative functions. But you know, in that case of Hines against the Queen, do you know that in that case, they examined also something called the Revenue Court in Jamaica? And you know what they had to say about that, Mr. Vice President? The Revenue Court is the same as the Tax Appeal Board and is now the same as the Valuation Tribunal, which exercises the same powers as the Tax Appeal Board. And I would like to quote from the case. In their lordship's view, however, it is the manifest intention of the Constitution that any person appointed to be a member of such a court, they're talking about the Revenue Court, should be appointed in the same manner and entitled to the same security of tenure as the holder of judicial office. So, Mr. Vice President, are we departing from the stare decisis as set out in the Privy Council in the case of Hines against the Queen? Are we, Mr. Vice President? Are we interfering with citizens' constitutional rights to enjoyment of property and not to be deprived thereof by due process of the law? Because if you don't pay your taxes, what can they do? They can exercise powers in order to take your property. Mr. Vice President, how can this be protecting our right to equality before the law and protection of the law? How can we be protected from the right of the individual to equality of treatment from any public authority in the exercise of its functions, or the right of a fair hearing? Having a political appointed tribunal can never protect our constitutional rights as guaranteed by Section 4 and 5. And Mr. Vice President, the Attorney General, he also quoted a Court of Appeal decision, P129 of 2012, Paul Lai against the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago. And the Attorney General quoted from the case, and I understood that he did not give the Senate the full picture of the decision of that case. So I felt incumbent, Mr. Vice President, to now bring to light what the case actually said. And the facts are that there was an issue regarding whether or not there's a breach of this doctrine of separation of powers regarding cabinet appointing industrial court judges. because although it says the president appoints the judges, it is really a decision of cabinet to appoint these industrial court judges. But, Mr. Vice President, the court said that it was not in breach of the doctrine of separation of powers. And they gave a reason why. And the reason is, and I will quote at paragraph 99 of the case. It says, the institutional independence of the court is such that it can adequately perform its basic judicial function without interference by the executive with its adjudicative role. Industrial court judges also have considerable security of tenure and financial security while they are actually carrying out their judicial functions. Are we seeing that protection being given to members of the tribunal in this case? No. Do they have security of tenure? No. They can be removed by the minister whenever, however, and at his pleasure. Thank you. Where's their financial security, Mr. Vice President? Judges, the case goes on to say, judges enjoy a fixed tenure that is secure against interference by the executive. Their terms and conditions are concretized. Mr. Vice President, that is the crux of the decision of that case. It is not that the cabinet is allowed to appoint these judges. The crux of the case is regarding the protection and the independence and insularity from the executive that these judges enjoy. That is why it was not in breach of the doctrine of separation of powers. But in this case, there's no protection, there's no security of tenure. So how can we say that this is not a breach of the doctrine of separation of powers? And then the AG went on to quote the case of Surat. I know that is one of the AG's favorite cases. Right? And, you know, Surat also discussed the tax appeal board, Mr. Vice President. No, he didn't. Yeah. The tax appeal, the Surat talked about the tax appeal board. And you know what they said about it? The members of the well-respected tax appeal board also constituted under an ordinary act of parliament, whom I thought to exercise a jurisdiction where independence of government was of particular importance. The tribunal chairman is given a status and terms of condition of office which are far superior to those of magistrates. They were comparing magistrates to judges. It is very difficult to say that they are not a sufficient guarantee of his or her independence of local pressure. Where is the independence and the insularity from pressure by the executive to the valuation tribunal? The lay assessors are much well protected. Their status is not unlike ordinary members of the tax appeal board. They are not appointed by, they serve for no less than 3 years, but eligible for reappointment. Their appointment may be terminated for cause by whom? The president, on the recommendation of the chairman. But their position in the tribunal is not as seriously to call in question their independence. So you know what we did with this bill, Mr. Vice President? You know what the government proposes to do? Remove this independent tax appeal board. And according to the Privy Council, they regarded them as a well-respected tax appeal board. To give this power now to a ministerial appointed tribunal to exercise judicial functions. That is an insult to the decision of the Privy Council. And when you look at different jurisdictions all over the world, I pulled from Bermuda, and you know who appoint Bermuda have a similar tribunal that deals with valuation. And Bermuda, the panel of members of the tribunal are 5 members, but no greater than 9. And do you know who appoints them? The Governor General. And they are removed by the Governor General's pleasure. Protection from the executive. Barbados, they have the Administrative Appeal Tribunal. Do you know who appoints this tribunal? The tribunal is appointed as the same manner as a judge in Barbados by their JLSE. That is the protection given to this tribunal, Mr. Vice President. But yet this government now wants to come and erode the independence of any judicial body in this country. And Mr. Vice President, the Attorney General, he went on to say we have tribunals in Trinidad and Tobago that ministers appoint these tribunals. But I want to make a distinction. He looked at the Electricity Inspection Act, and Section 12 of that act. It allows the minister in fact, where there's a chief inspector and where there's a decision that the chief inspector makes, an appeal lies on the minister. Mr. Vice President, you know what that decision is? If there's a little dispute between the person who owned the property regarding some installation or apparatus of some electrical fittings on a property, that is where the minister power lies. And he wants to come and compare, the Attorney General, wants to come and compare an appeal like that to an appeal on your property where the taxes are involved and they can actually seize your property when you are unable to pay taxes. He quoted from the Architecture Profession Act, Chapter 9002, and he said that, yes, the minister can actually, at Section 15 of that act, the minister can establish an appeals tribunal. Do you know what that appeals tribunal can determine? Whether or not somebody can be registered as an architect or not. How can we compare the right to register as an architect to that of setting a value to your property? Mr. Vice President, I am appalled. I am appalled, Mr. Vice President. And then also the Attorney General went on to make another song and dance about the former Minister of Finance, Larry Hawaii, Mr. Larry Hawaii. But let me tell you something, Mr. Vice President.
I'm hearing a lot of running commentary. I'm sure the senator does not need help, because when you all have the running commentary, I can't hear him properly. Senator, continue.
Mr. Vice President, and the Attorney General did not fulsomely read what Mr. Larry Hawaii said in the Hansard. The date is the 9th of the 9th, 2013, Appropriation Financial Year 2014, Bill 2013. Senator Larry Hawaii said, he never said property tax, Mr. Vice President. He said a land and building tax regime. It's a key pillar in all modern tax systems. It is not the same thing. You are misconceived. You are misconceived. Mr. Vice President, can I have your protection, please? Mr. Vice President, that is what is said. But you know what a responsible Minister of Finance also said? He said, this will require the property rules being brought up to date. I propose to phase in these taxes over the period 2014-2017, which times the property will be valued and consultations will be held with all stakeholders. Consultations, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this PNM government is contagious to consultation. Contagious. That is what they are. They're allergic. They're allergic, sorry, they're allergic. Mr. Vice, sorry. Mr. Vice President.
He made a mistake. He said allergic.
Yeah, it might reach your rundown. Who knows? Sorry. That is the excitement of this chamber, Mr. Vice President. But let me not be distracted by the members opposite. And Mr. Vice President, they have not.
All right, it is actually getting a little loud. I was waiting for it to calm down a bit, given statements of the senator. But I'm just on my feet to allow the chamber to return to a semblance of silence so the member could continue. Continue, Senator Hussain.
And Mr. Vice President, what is very important is that when you are touching a man's property, especially his castle, which is regarded as his home, consult with him.
Yes.
There's no consultation on this bill. None whatsoever.
No consultation.
And the ministers opposite can grin and they can laugh how much they want.
Yes.
But you are affecting poor people in this country.
Yes.
And this is serious business.
Yes.
And I feel that is a disrespect to this House when you humor a very important bill like this, Mr. Vice President.
Yes. Just lost a big case in the court there.
Yeah.
AG gone, you resign.
Sit. Okay. All right. Sit.
Oh, sorry, sir.
You're realizing what is happening.
Yes, sir.
I have to keep raising to my feet to allow the senator to be able to make his contribution. So what is going to happen now is that we are not going to have any crosstalk whatsoever. Continue, Senator Hosein.
And Mr. Vice President, now this brings me to a very important point where we drill down into the policy framework of the bill. Now, from my research, there are 3 different systems in which valuations of property can actually happen. Firstly, in some jurisdictions, they take the capital value and they calculate the property tax based on that. Or they would look at the site value, which is, I will explain in a little while, the site value, or they can use the annual rental value. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, what we are doing in this case is actually using the annual rental value as the base in which to calculate the property tax. Now, the capital value is the easiest one for any person who is going to pay their tax to understand, because what it means, it's simply you're calculating your property tax based on the market value of your property. The site value, it's disaggregating the improvements on the land, so you value the house or the building as separate from the land. And with the annual rental value, it is based on the market value of what your property can be rented for, nonetheless that it is actually not being rented currently. And Mr. Vice President, when we look at these 3 different systems, there must be some rationale. There must be some sort of analysis of the social conditions or the economic climate, the geography of the area to determine which model is actually suited for Trinidad and Tobago. And I will say from the outset that the annual rental value system is actually the most outdated system of valuation that they have. And Mr. Vice President, while I was reading and doing my research, I came across various positions, and one of the most important positions is that when you look at the annual rental value, an analysis should have been done on Trinidad and Tobago to determine whether or not the majority of the lands in Trinidad and Tobago are actually leasehold lands or whether they are freehold lands. Where the majority of lands are leasehold, it would mean that all of the lands now will be easier to assess an annual rental value. When majority of the lands are freehold, it would actually be easier to impose a market value analysis because it brings more clarity to the entire process. Because this process right now is very clouded. And in this case, the Minister and the Ministry of Finance, and even the Minister of Finance in the other place, was not able to provide any sort of evidence, was not able to provide any analysis regarding whether or not the majority of lands in Trinidad and Tobago are freehold lands or leasehold lands. But yet, we are proposing the annual rental value. So they did not do their proper investigations or proper analysis of the entire geographical area of Trinidad and Tobago, because this bill also affects persons in Tobago, Mr. Vice President. So had the minister done his homework, or the minister in the ministry done her homework, she could have come here and defended this position, why we are actually recommending annual rental value. But this system is actually a copy and paste from 2009. And in 2009, we still did not get any answers of why the annual rental value was used in the first place. And do you know, Mr. Vice President, that this government talks about reform and that they're coming here to transform Trinidad and Tobago? You campaigned in 2015 that Dr. Keith Rowley is the member for Diego Martin West is the doctor that will fix all the woes of this country. But yet, we are still in more woes, Mr. Vice President. We are in deeper waters than we were in 2015, Mr. Vice President. And when you look at a paper that was done, it's entitled Residential Property Tax Form in Northern Ireland, Impact Analysis and Spatial Redistribution. It says that the domestic area in Northern Ireland, they actually use the annual rental value from inception. But then they decided now to go with the market value analysis that I explained earlier on. And Mr. Vice President, what they found when they concluded their findings and their studies was that when the market value analysis was actually used, it means that when the market value was used, it actually decreased the property tax that persons who live in smaller, lower value homes had to pay, whereas those who lived in very expensive homes, their property tax would have increased. But what essentially the reason for their policy shift is that they shifted the burden evenly and equitably. And in this case, our taxes are not being distributed evenly or equitably, Mr. Vice President, because you are imposing taxes haphazardly on the population of Trinidad and Tobago without any form of analysis or any report being done in order to determine the conditions of Trinidad and Tobago. But then you look at the bill itself, Mr. Vice President, and in this bill, you actually see that two systems are being used. First, you calculate lands that are occupied on the annual rental value. But then when you go to Schedule 1 of the Act, it actually says that when you're calculating vacant lands, you use a percentage of the capital value. So you are collecting data of site value, improved value, capital value, and annual rental value. And then when you look at Part B of the schedule, it just says percentage to be applied to land with plant and machinery not housed in any building, 3%. 3% of what? 3% of site value, 3% of capital value, 3% of annual rental value. It does not say, Mr. Vice President. And I reiterate, again, a copy and paste bill. And when you look at what happened in Jamaica, the Jamaican experience is that they have actually done their homework. When they are now implementing their new property tax regime, they have already completed all of their valuations in 2013, 4 years prior to actually implementing their taxes. Now, you have not valued over 50% of the properties in Trinidad and Tobago, yet you want to come and haphazardly impose these taxes and burden the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President. They are not ready, Mr. Vice President, to roll out this. Do you know how many issues that this government will face when this tax is actually being implemented? And now I want to move to the second schedule of the bill, Mr. Vice President. And when you look at the second schedule, this is actually the valuation, the return required under Section 6 of the Valuation of Land Act. And when you look at the first section, it's personal information, which there's no problem with that. The second area, it's general. Talks about where the property is located, which municipality, the address, whether or not you purchase the property for 24 months preceding the date of filling out the form. What is the purchase price actually paid? Now that startled me. When any transaction takes place in this country where there's a conveyance of land, you have to pay stamp duty. And if a person does not account for the proper value of the land, then they are committing an offense, Mr. Vice President. So how come you now come and say, what is the exact value paid for the land? That should have been done at the stage where the property was actually being assessed for stamp duty purposes. So, Mr. Vice President, we are seeing all of the difficulties in the implementation of this property tax. Now, when you look at the third part of the VRF, this is the valuation return form, it covers when a person actually rents their property. So if I'm a landowner and I don't rent my property, then I stop filling out this form at Part 2 because I don't use my building as a rental, so I don't have to fill out Part 3 or Part 5 or Part 4 up until Part 7, Mr. Vice President. This form does not ask me how many rooms I have in my house. It doesn't ask you how big the house is, how much land the house is standing on. How are they going to properly assess any property on this form, Mr. Vice President? So this is actually a deficient valuation return form that is being proposed by this government. And if you can't get the basic things like the forms right, then how are you going to implement the taxes? And this brings into light serious concerns regarding the rolling out of this entire property tax system. But there's one other issue that I would like to raise, and I did not hear anyone raise it as yet in the Senate. But when your property is being assessed, Mr. Vice President, it not only affects your property tax, but it actually affects the water rates, Mr. Vice President. Because under the WASA Act, the price that you pay for water or the price that you pay for sewage services is directly determined on what your property is assessed at, Mr. Vice President. So what this means is that when they value your property for a higher price, it would now mean that your water rates go up and your sewage rates go up. So this property tax and this valuation of land does not only affect the price you pay for property tax, but is regarding the prices you pay for water and sewage services. So how much more shall we burden the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago with excessive taxes, Mr. Vice President? This cannot be. And we on this side, we will fight, Mr. Vice President, to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We will fight. And Mr. Vice President, this bill, if I have to summarize this bill, is a way in which the government is just trying to get some fast money. But if they haven't been spending in a reckless manner, they would not have to.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. They would not have to be in this position. If they did not settle suits for $150,000, we would not have to pay property tax, Mr. Vice President. And Mr. Vice President, the ordinary man on the street cannot pay this tax. And I heard the minister in the Ministry of Finance said that $500 is a little bit of money. It's nothing. Mr. Vice President, that hurt me. Because you know why? While the People's Partnership government was in office, we gave every mother with a child $500 in baby grant. Because $500 can buy baby milk. It can buy Pampers, Mr. Vice President. It can put food on the table. But to this government, $500 is nothing. My friend is forgetting the words of our honorable leader, the Prime Minister of this country, where he says $100 is plenty. And now you are going to actually impose thousands of dollars in taxes on the innocent people of this country, the hardworking people. But I must say that when we use this assessment system of the annual rental value, do you know what it will do, Mr. Vice President? It will actually dissuade persons from developing their property, because now they will understand that they will actually be liable to higher taxes. Because more improvements that you make on your property, it will simply mean more taxes you have to pay. It will stymie the construction industry in this country. No one will want to purchase property simply because of this tax, Mr. Vice President. So I ask this government to please reconsider, withdraw this bill. Do not impose this onerous tax on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. Vice President, with these few words, I would like to end my contribution.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for granting me this opportunity. It is always a pleasure coming after my colleague, Senator Shriki Soon, and to have heard my former colleagues on the opposition bench, Senator Hussain and Senator Mark. Mr. Vice President, I will hopefully not repeat what has been said before, because much has been said before. And so I would like to focus on what was stated in Clause 11 of the bill. Because what was stated here, in my mind, Mr. Vice President, provides for me the crux of a justification for an amendment, which is, I suspect, being circulated now to colleagues in the chamber. Clause 11 indicates that citizens may file an objection in writing with the commissioner, that's the Commissioner of Valuation, when the annual rental value of any land appearing in the valuation roll is incorrect, so the annual rental value is 50,000, and the clerk may have entered 500,000, so it's incorrect, or, Mr. Vice President, I'm looking at clause 11 of the bill, where the annual rental value is incorrect or unfair, having regard to other rental values therein. And the question which arises is this: under what circumstances will an annual rental value be deemed by the owner-occupier to be unfair? It is not incorrect, because incorrect is a typographical error, it's a handwritten error, it's an error in communication. But a value that is unfair means that there is some subjectivity in valuation which makes the value final, assessed by the Commissioner of Valuations, to be different from what the owner-occupier thinks it is. And so, Mr. Vice President, I ask myself, really, what is value? We are having a discussion on Land Valuation Act, and we haven't really spoken about this concept called value. And let me just raise the age-old conundrum in economics, and that is, if water is so essential to life, how come its price on the market is so low in relation to diamonds, which are not really essential to life, but which are more items of adornment? How come a diamond will fetch a higher price than a bottle of water? Is it a diamond is more valuable than water? And of course, when we pose the question in this way, students of mine will know they have been subject to this conundrum in microeconomic theory. We saw that there are two values we are talking about: value in use, which is water; value in exchange, which is diamond. And when we are looking at exchange value, that is value that is determined in the marketplace, we ask ourselves, how could a value which is determined in the marketplace be deemed to be unfair? Because the law specifically mentions unfair. And so we ask another hypothetical question. And the question is this: suppose all of my wealth is not in land or in property, homes, or house and land, or condominiums, or real estate, but all my wealth is in gold, physical gold. And there is a tax rate on my holdings of gold of a fraction of a percent on an annual basis. Would anything about that be unfair? The answer is no, because you simply go to the London Mercantile Exchange or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange today, and you will find that the price of an ounce of gold in the market is $1,350.50 US. And we could take that price, multiply it by the ounces that the Commissioner of Gold Evaluation says I have, and charge it, and you can charge me the tax based on that. There is no inequity or irregularity there. But, Mr. Vice President, you see, when we are dealing with the gold market, and the fact that a price is available on an hourly or even a minute-by-minute basis, we are dealing with a peculiar market, the market for soybean and silver. And when we are dealing with the property market, we are dealing with a market that is not perfect. A perfect market is one where there is a large number of buyers and sellers, and a frequent amount of trades, and that there is a continuum of activity in the market, and there is absolutely no question on anybody's mind as to what is the current price of wheat or gold or any of the commodities that we trade. But when we are dealing with property, and we have to come to a valuation, the valuation is going to be based on a measure of subjectivity because, Mr. Vice President, the property market does not have a transaction on properties with the volume and the frequency that we see in other markets. For example, take your home. It may very well be that the last time a property in your neighborhood was sold was a decade ago, and that for the rest of the time there were no trades. People are living in the neighborhood. As the minister who piloted indicated, or the Honorable Minister of Finance, that a few years ago the property market was very buoyant. So that if we are to value a property in a locale based upon a value, a market value, a value in exchange of a decade ago, there will be inequity because the current occupier will say that the property value that I have is different from what it traded 10 years ago because of the changing property values. 10 years ago, it may have been high. Today, it is, of course, different. And based upon last trades, therefore, we will have some disputes. It is going to come to the amendment that I am proposing, and the Ministry of Finance usually considers my amendments seriously before they dispense with them. But really, when we are looking at capital values, it is not as easy to determine in the real estate market as one may assume, simply because of the infrequency of trades. When we have a commissioner of valuation who says, well, I feel that 10 years ago your home or your land was sold for this amount, and it is maybe so now, what I would like to know is what is the formula or formulae which will influence his feeling. You see, unless I get that formula, what exactly are you using? Understanding that valuations are inevitably going to have an element of subjectivity to them in this peculiar market. And I have not seen the formula. I have not seen what he is going to use. And it could very well be that the homeowner may say that the proper way to value my house, the capital value, is how much I paid for it when I purchased it 20 years ago. It may be $800,000. And if you were to inflate it by the consumer price index, that is fair, 5% per annum over the last 20 years, would bring it to a correct value. But if you were to add in depreciation, a measure that Senator Siriki has indicated on impairment value, if you were to add in depreciation of 5% on an annual basis to cancel out the inflation of 5%, it may very well be that the homeowner is of the view that the value today upon which you are going to place any kind of taxation or any other purpose should be the purchase price I paid for my home 20 years ago. Who is to dispute that? How is the Commissioner of Valuation going to challenge that kind of logic? Let us look at rental value. Senator Shriki again, Senator Saddam Hosein again indicated, Senator Mark, that there are properties in this country, land in particular, which may never have been rented. They are owned. They have been in the families for years. You purchase them. Maybe you're a retired person and you are going to have some 10 acres of agriculture to bide your time while you are in retirement. You are not renting the land. You have purchased the land. How are we going to determine rental values of properties? And how is the commissioner going to determine rental values without having his values, his figures, subject to question? And one of the ways to do that with rental values is simply this. And I go back, way back to 1982, when I rented my very first apartment. Grad school, Montreal. I paid $180 a month for that apartment. And I was told to call an agency called Régie des Logements du Québec to find out if the landlord was treating me fairly or unfairly. It was their equivalent of a rent assessment board. And in Trinidad, I understand we had a rent assessment board in operation. I do not know when, if it is still in operation, or if it has ceased operation, who the members are, will we revive that board? But at least it will provide some measure of transparency with respect to the assessment of rent. The Rent Assessment Board will have its own methodology, and we will know. So if someone were to ask me, how much will my property rent for? I could ask a real estate agent, or I could ask a functioning rent assessment board, how much would properties in my neighborhood be selling for now? How do you go about valuing it? Or I could also ask Mr. Vice President, our rent assessment board, whether they have done any evaluations in my area so that I can have an idea and I can know whether the Commissioner of Valuation is accurate or inaccurate with any degree of flexibility. But given that we do not have these agencies, I too would like to know, as Senator Shrikisoon and Senator Hosein, exactly what is the basis that the Commissioner of Valuation, what is the formula? How does he arrive at it? Or is it that it's none of my business? He puts a figure there and he says, that's the valuation for tax purposes. Well, if I don't know, then this matter is going to be subject to dispute if I hold a different view. And if I hold a different view, I will then challenge the assessment. And the challenging and the appeal, therefore, is what I would come to a little bit afterwards. But before I go to the appeal, I do have some concerns with a $5,000 fine for an individual who fails to file his return within a reasonable period of time. I am wondering whether there would be any assistance given by the agency to people who are having difficulty filling out the form. I'm thinking about a kind old grandmother who may not be too au courant with these issues, may need assistance. Are we going to get assistance? You call a number. This is the implementability of the thing. You call a number and say, I need assistance with my form. I want to avoid paying the fine. Could you assist me forthwith? If that's the case, then I'd imagine few people will run afoul of the law. But if it is that there is no assistance, to simply raise this fee to $5,000, in my mind, will be a bit draconian. And I would want the government to reconsider the fine. I understand the need for the fine. The need for the fine is to have people have a negative incentive to fill out the necessary documentation and pass it on to the Commissioner of Valuations. But there are other ways to get people to do things. One of them is a positive incentive. If you fill in your form by a particular date, you may very well obtain a discount on one-year property tax at 10%. That is a positive incentive. These are what we have to look at. Instead of individuals facing fines, Mr. Vice President, could we give them an incentive to comply? That is not as far-fetched as it seems. Living in Barbados, and Senator Roach, I know, lived in Barbados, he would have paid electricity bills. Whenever I paid the bill before its due date, I always got a discount from the Barbados Power Company, 5% discount. And so I paid well before the due date, interested in saving the few dollars then. So I have this problem with the $5,000, and I'm wondering whether we not need to provide assistance. It is mandatory that the government should provide the assistance to complete the documentation. And the second, I think, we need to review this particular fine, because I see 5,000 fines for crimes which are much more serious than simply failing to fill out a particular form. Consider the incentive as well. We do need to change the way we do business, and we should be looking at positive incentives as opposed to negative penal fines. But I do have a concern, before I go on to the substantive points that I want to make, Mr. Vice President, and the concern I have is on page 3 of the bill, when we are looking at clause, on page 3 it would be clause Clause 3 on page 3, it says that, you see, a building occupies separately from other buildings a location on a single parcel of land. The building shall, for the purposes of tax liability under this act, be deemed to be land. By that I read that there is a building, a substantial building, and there is an annex on the side, and the annex on the side is not going to be taxed as a building, it's going to be taxed as, given the space it has, it's going to be taxed as land. Well, nothing is wrong with that. But you see, when you are talking about the condominium complex now, given that my understanding has always been that land taxes are lower than building taxes, the land taxes per acre in the old regime was something like, I think, $10 an acre or something, some small, some it may, of course, be higher now under the new dispensation. I am asking whether a single dwelling accommodation as part of a multi-dwelling building, so a condominium complex with 20 units, each condo, Mr. Vice President, selling for $1 million and more, but the condo occupies 2 acres of land. Is that condo going to pay the tax of 2 acres of land? Or is the condo going to pay the tax as if it's a 2,000 square foot condo, as if that condo is 2,000 square feet of land? If you're going to tax that condo as 2,000 square feet of land, I think it is going to be inequitable. I don't know if that's what the government intends, but what it is doing is that it is providing a positive benefit for condo owners, expensive condo owners, inexpensive condo owners, middle-income condo owners, but condos in this country don't sell for less than $1 million. I have long agitated that condos should sell for about, if you can get a 1-bedroom for $500,000, we should get a lot more people being first-time owners. But if we are doing that, I see there is going to be some discrepancy, and I know the Honorable Minister will address that when she is winding up. There will be some discrepancy, some inequity, where the people who own these expensive condos, who ought to be paying much more in tax than the middle-class family, the working-class family, struggle to own their own home on a 5,000 square feet. It would mean that they would pay, the working-class family will pay tax on 5,000 square feet of land and the home, and the condo owner will pay tax only on the square footage of his condo deemed to be land. That, to me, is inequitable. So we would need to address that, and I'm sure we will come to more debates on the other debate. But, Mr. Vice President, I come now to the Valuation Tribunal. See, based upon the inequity which arises when we engage in subjective valuations, I want to reemphasize, the valuation of land and property is not the same as the valuation of gold, soybean, silver, and iron ore. We have a transparent market in other areas, and in our area, in the area of land, we are going to impute values. We impute values. We are asking ourselves, what will happen if we had full information? Regrettably, the Commissioner of Valuation does not have full information, and he must make a judgment call all the time. That's the nature of the business. In some instances, he may find that a property of a similar size may have been sold last month, and so he's able to look at your property compared to that property. But that will, in my mind, not normally be the case. It will be more the exception than the rule. I think if you ask any person in Trinidad and Tobago today, given again what we saw over the last decade with respect to property values, what is the price they can obtain if they want to sell this property today? They may have a reference price of 10 years ago, and they may say, well, 10 years ago, a neighbor sold his for $2 million. But today, the economic environment is such that I don't know if I could get half that, because I may call a price, but it's only when I get a buyer and I am willing to settle the transaction, a trade has occurred, a value has been determined consequent upon a trade. So that, Mr. Vice President, we are going to have a Commissioner of Valuations who will be making subjective calls on the valuations which are going to be done. And therefore, Clause 11 doesn't surprise me. There will be people who are going to say that I think your valuation in Clause 3, let me quote him again, is unfair. And now, since we recognize that there will be people who consider the valuation unfair, the valuation tribunal seems to have a legitimate and logical place. I heard the Honorable Attorney General, and I asked myself, he has stated quite succinctly that there are many administrative tribunals which are not really appointed by the President of the Republic. They are administratively appointed by the minister to sort out domestic issues. Well, just for information, I was the chairman of an administrative tribunal way back in 1997, I think. It was a tribunal established to determine electricity rates on industrial consumers, appointed by the President of the Republic then, President Hassan Ali. And incidentally, the Chief Justice appeared before me, together with his senior counsel, who is now, I think, the chairman of the Law Review Commission. And now a member of my tribunal is now an appeal court judge, so we had high power. I knew absolutely no law, didn't know much then, no less now. But the fact of the matter is that tribunal could not have been accused of being manipulated by the Minister of Public Utilities then. The judgment of the tribunal on industrial rates, I'm sure, and the AG, I think his client lost. He lost the case. There was no appeal. There was no question as to biases and so on. And I think that a tribunal of this nature, valuation of land, questioning the valuation offered by the commissioner, the public servant, I think as far as it's practicable, I would request of the Ministry of Finance to consider whether to avoid the decisions of this valuation tribunal being challenged by a superior court, the High Court, on the basis of bias, because even though the tribunal may be appointed by the president, I still see a challenge going if changes are not made. But even if there are changes to the composition of the tribunal, I can still see a citizen stating that the commissioner of valuation produced a valuation, I challenged it, and the appointees of the Minister of Finance, and I concur with it, I can see it happening, the appointees of the minister, whoever is the minister, upheld the decision of the commissioner of valuation, and I could take this to the High Court. The problem with that, and the AG said there are other courts, is if you are wealthy or well off, and if you can afford attorney representation, you can very well take it all the way up to the Privy Council. But the objective of law is not only for the rich. The objective is for a poor person who feels aggrieved to have his matter settled administratively at no cost. And so I would like, in the interest of equity and fairness, for consideration to be given for the tribunal to be appointed by the President of Trinidad and Tobago. Because I was appointed in 1996 to chair the tribunal on electricity rate determination. I did not hear the Attorney General indicate what harm will result, if there is genuine harm that will result on having the tribunal appointed by Her Excellency the President, and I will say, okay, I consider the harm, but he did not convince me that there was any harm that was going to result and that this was a policy position of the government. And we will be giving any minister from now until the year 2525 the power to make these appointments. And yes, Mr. Vice President, Madam President, yes. There is a lacuna now. Now the seat has been Madam President, my own position is that we should really, again, give serious consideration. There is no ill will or rancor in my recommendation. It is purely for efficiency. Because one of the objectives of reforming our judicial system is to do two things. If we could impose fines, let us impose fines and don't clog the jails. And if we could settle something administratively, don't clog the courts. That's what the objective is. And what I am seeing here is where, you see, Madam President, a long time ago, I heard a calypso by Lord Spoiler. And in that calypso, Spoiler said there was a magistrate who committed a traffic offense and he was dutifully charged. But the case against this magistrate was called in the magistrate's own court. And he found himself trying himself, and he found himself at one point in contempt and so on. What Spoiler was saying is that the situations will arise when there will be a conflict of interest, and if it could be avoided, in my mind, it should be. So that's a policy position. That's for the government to undertake, and I think the public interest will be so defended. Madam President, I come now to the amendment that I have circulated. I see what the government is proposing, what the Honorable Minister of Finance is proposing, is that the Valuation Tribunal shall consist of a chairperson who shall be an attorney at law. I have no problem with that. 2 other persons, one of whom shall have wide knowledge and experience in the valuation of property. But later on in the bill, Madam President, I see on page 10 of the bill, this would be 25G5. It says, an act or proceeding of the Valuation Tribunal shall not be regarded as invalid because of a defect in the appointment of a member of the Valuation Tribunal or a vacancy in its membership. Let me read that again. You see, an act or page 10, Madam President, 25G5. An act or proceeding of the Valuation Tribunal shall not be regarded as invalid because of a defect in the appointment of a member of the Valuation Tribunal or a vacancy in its membership. My reading of that is if there is a vacancy in the membership for a few months, the minister is looking around, and there can be good reason for there to be a vacancy. Someone may have gotten ill, someone may have resigned, someone may have died, whatever it is. The Valuation Tribunal will not be stymied in its work. And it therefore considers the tribunal sitting with, I'd imagine, not 3 members, but in my tribunal, I had to sit with 3. 3 people sitting in the tribunal. Whether the government intends for the tribunal, which is really a hearing body, to sit with 2, this is what I'm reading in 25.5 here, 25G5. If that is the case, this is what I would recommend. And I'd like 25A2 to read as follows. The Valuation Tribunal shall consist of a chairperson who shall have wide knowledge and experience in the valuation of property. He is the person, or she is the person, I would like as the chairperson of the property, of the organization. Because whenever the tribunal sits, the chairman is the person who has wide knowledge and experience in the valuation of property. Be an attorney at law with 10 years or more of experience. You see, if we have a chairman who is attorney at law with 10 years or more of experience, it doesn't say anything other than he has 10 years of experience in insurance law. He has 10 years of experience in any type of law, divorce law. He has just 10 years of experience. I would imagine that the Honorable Minister, recommending persons who will then be appointed by Her Excellency the President, I don't want to second-guess government policy, will choose an attorney, Madam President, who has some experience in 2 areas. One, conveyancing. He or she has done land matters before. He or she has done matters pertaining to the transfer of property, and so has dealt with a lot of properties in her training. And I raised that because when I purchased the property 20 years ago, I dealt with a conveyancer, and I said, of all the people, Madam President, who deserve their money, I thought I should have paid the conveyancer more. Because after she did her work for me, I was convinced that there is no flaw in the transfer of title. So I would hope that the attorney at law with 10 years of experience is someone with conveyancing experience. If you can't get that person, at least have the person have mediating experience, because there is another subclause in the law which says that the tribunal, as far as is practicable, will aim to reconcile without going to any higher body the difference in values between what the owner feels the value should be and what the Commissioner of Valuation says. And so if you have an attorney with mediation skills, I am sure that that objective of mediation will be, of course, resolved. And then it says in the bill before us that the government is considering one other person, two other persons, just one of whom will have knowledge and valuation, and one other person, a third person. Could we, in this important tribunal, not define this person and not say this person must have certain characteristics, not just any individual? I'm sure the government, the minister, whoever it is appointing, will not appoint any individual simply because of affinity or family connections. But really, I would prefer for the third person to be another suitably qualified person drawn from the construction or real estate sector. Why am I saying that? So I want the chairperson to have wide knowledge and experience in the valuation of property. He must have. Let us determine, he may not have certification, you know, but he should have experience in valuation. Again, when I purchased the property 2 decades ago, I had to value it for my bank, and they recommended me to a valuator, and the detail with which I don't know whether the valuator had any designation. I paid him a fee. That's what he did. But his valuation was proper. His inspection and so on was thorough. And he was able to tell me that the price I am paying is maybe about $10,000 less than what he is valuing it for. And the bank was very satisfied with that. So I would like the chairperson to have the wide knowledge. So when the tribunal sits, if it sits only with two, at least it can sit with the chairperson with experience and the attorney at law, or the chairperson with experience and a person drawn from the construction or real estate sector. Because if it is that the tribunal can sit with two, with the attorney alone as chairman, then we will have an attorney, 10 years of experience in commercial litigation, together with another person, two persons, none of whom has any experience in valuation, and decisions made by these two alone because of a vacancy and so on in the tribunal, decisions made by these two, I am sure, will be challenged on the basis that, A, they were appointed by the minister, and two, the critical person in the tribunal was not there. He is absent. So I think to correct what I see as a potential problem, I would like the government to give consideration to the changes. The chairman being the person with experience, the attorney at law with 10 years or more of experience, hopefully with the relevant experience in mediation, conveyancing, and one other suitably drawn person from the construction or real estate. Why construction and real estate? We are dealing with construction, and we are going to value buildings. We are dealing with real estate where we are valuing land, and someone with experience in that sector who is sitting on this tribunal will know that I have constructed, he may be a quantity surveyor, that was for the buildings part.
Senator Mahabir, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So that if he is drawn from the real estate sector, then I am sure, Madam President, he too will bring to bear on the deliberations of the tribunal a certain measure of expertise, which will give the public confidence that the ruling of the tribunal really should not go further to clog up the High Court. And I think it would be fairer. Madam President, in my few minutes, I looked at, again, the grounds for removing a member of the tribunal. The minister may suspend. And then I saw for physical or mental incapacity or for cause. Is the minister going to determine that because someone has an ankle problem and he can't climb the stairs and he has a physical disability to get to the top floor, that he is medically unfit? I would think that you could remove someone for being medically unfit, remove it from the minister. The minister should take advice from somebody, because you can say the person is medically unfit. And I see mental incapacity come in all the time. I don't know what mental incapacity is. We need to look at mental health. Is the fact that someone's seeing a psychiatrist for stress and anxiety mentally incapable of performing his functions. Let us look at these things and see whether the minister should have the power or not. Yes, it should go to a medical doctor. Madam President, I saw 25B2. A member of the Valuation Tribunal becomes bankrupt. I have seen this in many, many laws. And when I see this, Madam President, I say to myself, in this particular area, why are we imposing bankruptcy? Take a very, very good professional who has a real estate business going on the side. He borrowed a few $1 million from the bank, but the economy turns against him and he can't sell the homes he has constructed. He knows a lot about the business. He knows about valuation. He has become bankrupt. Are we going to remove him from office simply because the building construction industry went sour? I know of many people in the 1980s who faced that problem. They are not immoral or inept in any way, and we need to be looking at bankruptcy again in this context to see whether someone's investments went sour. Should he be removed for that, especially when it happens in real estate all the time? Finally, Madam President, I'm rushing here, but when I look at 25HB, 25HA and 25HB. 25HB makes no sense whatever. I don't know if the drafters are here, but it has to be removed because what 25HA says is that we are going to furnish the Valuation Tribunal by writing signed by that person, or in the case of a body corporate, by a director and so on. And then 25B simply replicates a section of 25A. So 25B has to go. It makes no sense. And if 25B has to go, then there will be consequential amendments. C will then become B, and so on. So that's for the drafters to look at. This, so basically 25B makes no sense to me whatever. It doesn't read at all, and it's a replication. That's for the drafters. And since, Madam President, if that change, it seems clear to me, has to be made, and we have to go back to the other place, I see no reason why the government can't give serious consideration to the amendments that I have proposed, which I think are very reasonable and practicable. Madam President, I thank you for giving me the time to contribute.
Senator Roach.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I am pleased to probably take a few minutes just to raise some of my concerns with this bill, which in principle I think is a bill that is necessary, is a bill that has been debated elsewhere. It's a bill that that raises a lot of emotions within and outside these chambers every time it is up for public commentary. The bill and act to amend the Valuation of Land Act, Chapter 5803. What concerns me most about this bill, Madam President, is that the fact that it affects everyone that is probably potential or actual landowner in Trinidad and Tobago is that its vastness, right? It's going to touch everyone that has property or a potential owner of property in the country, and that the law should be written in such a way that anybody, non-lawyer, should be able to read this clearly as possible. It must be clear, it must be cogent, and it must read easily, and must not necessarily depend upon the assistance of any technical person, more so even an attorney at law. And from the type of the debate that has taken place thus far here, you can see the doubts, the ambiguities, and the uncertainties in many of the clauses that have been suggested in this bill thus far. Without going into all of them, I mean, they have been mentioned by a number of my colleagues on both sides thus far. And what I think ought to be spelled out, probably by the minister in her winding up, as the case may be, is that what the public really would be interested in knowing is exactly what is the real objective of this amendment Valuation of Land Act to achieve. What really and truly is the purpose of it. And clearly the purpose coming out of it is to value land for the purposes of raising taxes, right? There's nothing wrong in it. There's nothing absurd in it. In most modern societies, owners of property are subjected to some level of taxation for the property that they possess. What concerns, I think, the average member of the public, where these things are concerned, where taxes are concerned, it's not so much in the paying of the taxes, but again, it's how your taxes are used. And it cannot be divorced easily from it. Because there are penalties for not paying taxes and so, but there's no penalties for when people's taxes are misused, abused, disappear, misappropriated, and things like that. People have a great concern about this. And it causes a lot of anxiety. I have spoken to a number of persons who have approached me about the implications of this for them, especially old persons who are not inclined to the legal niceties of most of us, or have access to legal minds to assist them. And certainly, the thing is, in explanation, I'm keep saying that I would like this act to be as simplified as possible, so that the average ordinary person can read and understand what are their obligations under this. The valuation, how the land is to be valued, there are certain obvious issues that would need to be addressed. The minister in her opening statement discussing and trying to give the explanation about there are three different ways, at least, in which the valuation is going to be assessed for I think, is residency, commercial, as well as industrial. And the flexibility is necessary because to cater for those differences in ownership. I think the ordinary person would like to understand more clearly, however simplified this can be made, to understand, I have a property, this is what I'm expected to pay based on this value. It cannot be too intricate, and from the debate so far, there's a lot of ambiguity so far in this, right? In terms of the issue raised that the Attorney General presented himself to help the chambers in grappling with, in terms of the tribunal, again, I understand his explanation. His explanation is a quite valid one in terms of these type of specialized tribunals not being unique. This one is not a unique one. And he drawing on the cases, well-known case of Surat and so forth, to talk about procedure and so forth. All that is well and solid and good. But my concern with the tribunal and my fellow Senator Senator Mahabir raised on it just now, mentioned it, is that whether this tribunal in this operation is going to help to alleviate the burden on the courts, or is it going to add to the burden of the court? And this is critically important because we are setting up institutions that are not properly financed, or they are not properly resourced in every way in order to achieve the objective from which they are being promoted. And hopefully this will not be one that falls into that bandwagon again. So I think one needs to think about that clearly. Good intentions, like I've said before, road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the good intentions of this will lead to speedy resolve and dispositions of concerns of persons who are querying the evaluation or whatever concerns they have with their property by the Commission of Valuation. I think that is important. Is it just being set up again to clog the system, just clogging it from a different angle? This needs to be clear. If it is not going to serve that purpose of expediency, promptness, and reliability and confidence, I think is something that we need to rethink before implementing it. And I think this is where Dr. Mahabir, Senator Mahabir, was coming from in a certain way. In addition to that, another thing he raised that I think is important from a practical point of view with tribunals is that this tribunal is supposed to consist of 3 persons. And according to the clause, it's supposed to be decision of the majority, right? So if you have 2 persons sitting, obviously there can be a majority of 2. And learning from the experiences that we have had in recent times in another area, where you have a judicial officer sitting in judgment of a number of cases and not able, for whatever reason, to be able to continue. How would these things proceed? How is this to be done? I think we need to be able to factor that into our legislative exercise here today. Is it that we're going to provide that in the event, for whatever good reasons, a member of the tribunal is not able to continue sitting and probably would have sat on a number of matters that are inconclusive, how are these matters to be concluded? Is it going to have to start before another constituted 3-member tribunal de novo, or can it be continued? I think that is something we need to put some attention to. We need to get some guidance on that. What is the practical aspect of dealing with this? Because it is not something that is far-fetched. It's not something that is whimsical. It's something that has occurred, and I think we need to take in front where that is concerned, to be proactive with it. In terms of the appointment of the members of the committee of the tribunal, it being the minister as opposed to the president, the Attorney General gave, the undertaking, it's provided for in the act. There's a lot of checks and balances. That you have the views of the Court of Appeal, which state basically once you proceed, there is certain person is reliable. There's nothing offensive about it. I do agree that is so, but at the same time, I mean, we are in a situation in this country where people are becoming more and more distrusting of people in authority, right, across the board. And therefore, whatever we can do in our part when we are doing this, so as to lend some sort of assistance in getting back that confidence in them, we need to do it. We need to do it. And if, therefore, people at large, if people might feel more comfortable with the president having such a role to play, why not? I'm just saying. Yes, of course, there's the checks and balances with your appeal to the court and so forth. And again, the concerns raised are the fact that if you have to go to court requires resources. And not everybody will be privileged or be in a position to be able to financially afford to litigate something that we have a very good reason to litigate. So we need to look at these things as well. The other thing that I wanted to raise with that, where persons are concerned, people really would like to know. The point, I think, was raised by Senator Wade Mark when he said during references from Jamaica in terms of persons being able to be financed when they have an appeal by the government as opposed to the person having to do that themselves. I think that is something we need to contemplate on as well, because we are in difficult times. A lot of resources are not available to people. One wants to discourage litigation, but where litigation is necessary, the courts are there for that, and I think people should be empowered to be able to have access, reasonable access, to be able to litigate a genuine concern that they have not be distressing to them, where their property may be threatened in terms of confiscation, as the case may be. Again, yeah, in terms of the tribunal, the terms of appointment of 3 years, and it's supposed to have all of them not to lapse at the same time, so have overlapping. I think 3 years is a bit short, because we do not know the nature of the procedure of this tribunal, how it's going to operate. I think 5 years term for members, will probably fluctuate 5 and 4 years or 3 years, in case we have that thing. But to me, there should be a lengthier time, because we know how things go in this country. We tend to be a little lethargic on the efficiencies, and 3 years will pass like nothing. So, time you get this tribunal up and running, getting the proceeding down, organized and implemented, 3 years might be up, and you have somebody who have just started to get some sort of a understanding in their function has to go. There's no security that the person will remain, even though it's renewable. Yes. So I think there's something we need to look at in terms of the years. I mean, that is something not unreasonable. Yes, the other thing is the point that was raised again, and I immediately, when I was reading through the bill, the first thing that jumped out at me, because probably it was written in figures, is the penalty. I think the penalty of $500 moving to $5,000 is oppressive, really and truly. I know what you want to try and achieve, but there are so many different ways of achieving things like that. And I mean, one doesn't always have to use the stick. One could also use the carrot, which is what Dr. Mahabir was saying. And I want to lend him his support in that regard. I think that we need not go where that is concerned. We can use some sort of other more positive ways of encouraging people to want to pay, to want to be legal, and to honor the obligations that we all would like to honor obligations, to enjoy the fruits of a well-functioning society. Give the government the resources that they want to do, and also put the government on notice that they also will be held to a high standard if they too themselves find themselves lagging in way in which they deal with our resources, right? There must be some sort of balance and some equity. So at the end of the day, what I would like to see in the minister's winding up of thing is that this act, basically, this amendment is going to bring about, people will feel a sense of equity in terms of how properties are valued. People will feel a sense of motivation to pay what is assessed, what they are assessed to pay. People will feel a sense of justice, that if there is any error wherever it is, that they have reasonable means of having it addressed and corrected in a prompt way and an efficient and reliable way, basically. So, Madam President, those are the concerns that I think that jumps out at me where this bill is concerned. And with those few words, I say thank you.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam President, it is indeed a privilege to stand before this August House in defense of the Valuation of Land Amendment Bill 2018. As we are all aware, and has been said before, the valuation of land is nothing new to Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, as was brought out by my colleague in piloting the bill, the Valuation of Land Act was enacted almost 50 years ago, and in its current state, the Act forms part of an ecosystem of legislation, some of which dates back to the 1902. The resultant system, Madam President, is convoluted, burdensome, outdated, and more importantly, lack in equity. And so, Madam President, this Valuation of Land Amendment Act is an attempt on the government's part to move the legislation into the 21st century and to develop a more streamlined and a more efficient approach to land valuations. It will do this primarily by bringing the Valuation of Land Act in line with the soon-to-be-introduced Property Tax Act, thus ensuring that the process of determining annual taxable value and collecting that correspondent property tax flows smoothly from beginning to end. And in doing so, it would allow the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to actively share the burden of adjustments as we seek to keep our economy afloat during these difficult times. Times, I dare say, Madam President, that is not of our doing. Times that are here among us, to a large extent, as a result of international factors. But times, and difficult times, which we are experiencing now, which are to no small extent due to the reckless economic management that was done during the last 5 years by the last administration. Madam Speaker, as again was said before, there's a nexus between the Valuation of Land Amendment Bill and the Property Tax Bill. And if we were able, as we had proposed, to put these two bills together, as was done in the other House, a lot of questions and a lot of issues that were raised, especially by some of the independent senators, were going to be addressed. However, we are placed in this situation not because of our own doing, but simply because the members on the other side, especially our opposition members, choose that it must be done this way. I must add that the very nature of these two bills, the valuation of the land amendment bills and the other one to come, are meant to protect, actually, and I want to repeat that, they are meant to protect the most vulnerable in our society whilst ensuring that those who are in a position to contribute more will do so. Madam President, this particular bill is fairly straightforward and attempts to do just that. It is really an attempt to spread the burden of adjustment, and this is something that this government has been doing and has been attempting to do for a little while. I will take this time now, Madam President, to address some of the concerns that were raised by some of my colleagues on the other side. And I will start my contribution by quoting what I felt was a very pointed comment by the Sunday Express in their editorial of October the 8th, Sunday, October the 8th, 2017. And I quote, it said, "If the past holds any lesson for us, it is that Trinidad and Tobago lacks the socio-political cohesion to face adversities united in strength. Just when we most need to rally to our common cause, division seems to come more naturally, and we splinter and weaken ourselves." Madam President, those words are very, very insightful, especially, and when I was writing them down, I even told my colleague at that time, Senator Mark, looked over at me and he asked me, "What am I looking at?" And I said I was just getting inspiration. Those were the words that were coming into my mind when I hear, and when that is the problem that people see with us as a country. And therefore, as the leaders of this country, we have a role to play in correcting that perception. Madam President, we are clearly not in normal times. We are in times that, as I said before, we are in difficult economic times that came about because of international forces, things that has happened in the past. But for us to get out of these times, we really do need to come together. And I think sometimes, as much as we are on opposite sides, one of the things that help us to come together is that we have to stop this attempt of always demonizing each other, almost making it believe that someone is doing something because it is we are demons on one side, and we are therefore trying to make things not because it is needed, not because it is required, not because it makes sense, because that person is a demon. And we have to stop that. We have to stop that level of that type of conversation, and we need to change the narrative. So this bill is about bringing us to the 21st century. I don't think anybody here could stand and accept that. We have valuations is something that all countries must have. The fact that we are doing it is not because we are demons, not because we are bad people. You have a value, you have a property, you need to get it valued. And we need to have a valuation rule, and yes, so that it will, and we have to have our laws lined up so that you will get a value, and yes, it will move into the property tax, all right? But that is because it's a good thing. There is nothing wrong with that. And there is nothing cynical about it. It is not an attempt, Madam President, to pauperize the country, as Senator Mark will have us want to believe, and to take advantage of poor people. As a matter of fact, if you look at this bill, and I find it strange and I find it hard to believe that if you have a bill that is attempting in one way, I mean, logic tells me if you live in a very big property and you're living in places where the supposed 1% lives, and you are living in the West and you're living in certain areas of this country, chances are your property will have a significant value or more value than a poor person or a person living in a more humbler abode, in a more humbler area. And therefore, a bill that attempts to place a higher valuation, which will then, as you said, allow for us to be able to exercise more taxes out of that. There is nothing could be wrong with a bill that does that. As a matter of fact, contrary to popular belief, if you are able to collect your taxes and you are able to collect these valuations, by extension, lead to additional taxes from people who could pay, it will allow for you to be able to do a number of things that you want to do for poor people and for the less fortunate in our society. So so this is a very progressive bill, and one should not be arguing against things like this. It is something that is natural, and there's nothing demonizing about it. A lot has been said about the whole idea of the penalties that is being charged, and we heard Senator Small mentioned about whether or not we need to, Senator Roach, whether or not we need to, sorry, I apologize, Senator Small, you always seem, we always seem to mention you because of your affinity to the financial sector. But sorry, I apologize, Senator Roach. We were talking about one of the comments is this whole idea of the price and the penalties that will be charged. And this is not about an opportunity to raise revenue. But, Madam President, in the bill, it talks about, first to begin, a very important word everybody seems to be glossing over. A person who willfully. So this is not about a situation whereby I am penalizing someone. I am penalizing someone, moving it from 5 to 5,000. A person who willfully fails to make a return within the prescribed time under this, that is being asked. And then a person makes a return which is defective or incomplete or which is to his knowledge false.
Again, willfully.
And again, remember, it starts with the concept of willfully. So you must willfully decide not to do it, and also you must willfully decide to make a false declaration. Now, again, we as leaders in this society, and we talk about leadership. And leadership is not about the Prime Minister. Leadership is about all of us. Isn't that not something that we want to penalize or prevent somebody from doing? Do you not want somebody willfully to not make or willfully to make a false declaration? And are we condemning that type of behavior by saying, that's 500? So it has nothing to do about whether or not 500. And we're not doing that because we find $5,000 is not much money. And therefore it is not, it has nothing to do with that. And therefore, again, but when we say it, what is the conversation? The conversation that we should be encouraging in this House is actually agreeing to the fact that you must not willfully attempt to defraud the government. Because when you attempt to defraud the government by doing things like that, you are actually stealing from the poor. And the same people that we are attempting to protect the poor that we talk about, we are actually putting them more at risk by some of our actions. So I've heard those comments, and I am saying I am one that totally support any person who willfully attempts to defraud the government. I am saying $5,000 is more than adequate. We also talked in another place, and we picked legislation. We talked about what happened in Jamaica, all right? And what happened in Jamaica, if I was hearing correctly, is that if you did not file, that you were charged, you were actually... A little bit of money, but you could be imprisoned. But you could be imprisoned. So what are we really then saying? I mean, we want to pick what is right here and what is wrong here, all right? But actually, this doesn't talk about imprisonment, all right? But it also sends the message clear that we do not want anyone to willfully attempt to defraud the government. Another issue that a lot of conversation has been raised in the House, centered about the Valuation Tribunal and whether or not that should be appointed by, and I think the Attorney General gave justice to the fact that nothing is wrong with the fact that it is being appointed by the President. And therefore, not by the President, by the Minister of Finance. And therefore, we have to start, you know, as a country, we got ourselves in a little constitutional, and I've heard a lot of our leaders before speak about constitutional reform and the need for it. We have found ourselves in a situation now where people are talking about the need or whether it is correct or not to have these commissions that we have that govern us. And if you go back, we have understood where did they come from. They came from the fact that there's a little lack of, it came from way back in 1961 when we were going to get independence, and there was a little bit of mistrust that we had among ourselves, so we created this. And therefore, there is a lot of laws. The idea, we have to trust, we have a system, and I understand that, yes, there's been a reduction in the level of trust in the society. But really and truly, if it is correct, if it is nothing illegal for the minister to be able to appoint the tribunal, and in the law it actually talks about all the ways under which, yes, he could remove the members of the tribunal, but it's also specific as to under what conditions could he remove the person. So you can't just appoint them and decide tomorrow morning to move them. It is not like that. You have certain laws and certain things. And I totally agree that if someone is on that tribunal and the person is bankrupt, that is definitely a reason, I will dare say, all right, that is a reason why you should not serve. Madam President, when you are bankrupt, right, you are vulnerable and you are at risk. When you are bankrupt, chances are you owe people money, all right? And when you have to deal with serious judgments as it relates to valuations and hear people appeals and so forth, and you are bankrupt, I don't want to throw any aspersions on anyone, but it puts you at risk. And because of the importance of the particular tribunal, I would think that if you are bankrupt and owe people a lots of money, therefore that we should not as a country put you in a position that you could be placed at risk or place us at risk. So I think it will be imprudent or not prudent to put someone who is bankrupt on the tribunal. So I support that saying there. But I want to also make the point that there are a number of different, that the decisions made by this particular tribunal, if people have any problems with it, if you don't like it, to be based on what I have read and what was the minister in piloting the bill spoke about, you have the rights to go take it to the High Court. And then you could take it to the Court of Appeal and so forth. So there is recourse. So this is not something that is static and it's a final. And therefore, it cannot. This is a body that will attempt to help to mitigate and deal with particular situations. And therefore, I see no problem in it being trusting and by it being appointed by the Minister of Finance, especially in light of all of the conditions under which he has to ascribe after appointing someone. He could only remove that person under certain actions. We also heard a lot of conversations, and someone made the point, and we hear a lot about this whole aspect of this bill, this valuation bill, is geared towards, again, taking people's land or charging individuals. And again, the bill, as was piloted, talked about a minimum valuation that is going to be ascribed. So that one who is less fortunate and is living in a humble dwelling, the minimum valuation that is going to be ascribed is one of 18,000. All right? 18,000 annual rentable value. But what is important, and I don't want to get in too much into the Property Tax Act, as was also said, that figure equates to $540 as the equation of property tax. Now, Madam President, $540 annually equates to, and I did a little bit of maths there, right? That is $45 a month. $45 a month. Now, Madam President, we know that old age pension in this country is about $3,500. Right? Thanks to the PNM, as I said, old age pension now is $3,500. The point I want to make, protection, Madam President. The point I want to make, and I will make it a lot more clearer when we speak to the property tax, is let us stop the rhetoric. Let us change the conversation. Let's stop the rhetoric about this is going to allow people to lose their houses. A pensioner gets $3,500. If you have to pay $45, Madam Chairman, that equates to 1.2%. 1.2% of your disposable income. Now, again, people talk about Jamaica. They talk about Barbados, right? They talk about a number of different areas, right? I will tell people, in most of those jurisdictions, property tax represents close to 5% of your disposable income. A conversation which I will deal with in another place. But here it is again, we are talking about even at minimum, at the baseline which we are setting, all right, the person will pay $45 per month. And again, you having individuals getting, and I don't want to put them as the lowest, but you having people who are getting from the state an old age pension of $3,500. The level of that person's ability and that person's losing their property. So all the fear that is being created around this valuation in light of what is to come is again misfounded, and it's again about creating a hype, and it's again playing into and putting out a conversation there that is all geared towards dividing us rather than bringing us together. Madam President, finally, in dealing with one of the, what I consider to me the most, well, I wouldn't use an adjective for fear of contradicting this or saying something that is not right in this house. But, you know, somebody actually made the contribution coming from the other side about the fact that this is required. My colleague here, Senator Hosein, that this is required because of the reckless spending of the present government. And because of this reckless spending, this is why they have to do this now to poor people. Again, I want to urge all of us as leaders, yes, but again, somebody hearing that on the outside, people who are looking at us on the television, you know, people are grasping at straws and say, well, okay, I'm going down the road with that. But we know that is not so. We know it is not so. I was kind enough to say we have gotten here because of international factors. But we all know that the reason why we are here, right? The reason why we are here, we all know the truth. That the reason why we are here is we talk about reckless spending. I mean, it was the UNC that had reckless spending and budgets of 63 billion, 58 billion, an average budget during their time of almost $58 billion worth of spending. $58 billion worth of spending. And at those times...
Members, please. You know, I have been allowing a little crosstalk, but then when it is seeking now to drown out what the senator is saying, I have to intervene. So please, continue, Minister.
So thank you, Madam President. So it was not my intention to go down that road, because I like to go forward. But again, you heard the saying about the pot calling the kettle black. You know, I mean, come on. All right? Let us be clear about who is trying to stabilize this economy. Let us be clear about who is practicing prudence. Let us be clear about who is talking about proper economic management. Let us be clear about who is trying to reduce the deficit. We all know those things lie on this side. And when we're talking about, again, to be clear, who spent over $59 billion for an average for the last 5 years, we know where that side, who did that. The records are clear.
That's right. And the people know that. Yeah.
So when Senator Mark talks about, you know, we will meet outside, right? And the pavement. When Senator said about we'll meet outside and we'll meet in another place, all right? All right? Madam President, we have no problem on this side about trying to conduct our affairs in a manner that is right, a manner that is prudent, all right? And we all know that at this point in time, this country is in a position, right, that we need to collect. There are a number of levers under which people could move, you know, Madam President. There are a number of levers. And one of the levers you have to try to reduce your deficit is to attempt to collect as much revenue that you can. Because if you choose not to do that, as I'm sure Senator Mahabir in economics will know, right, that there are other levers which you could do. And those levers, when people talk about perpetuating them and you're trying to protect the poor, that at the end of the day, if you don't move certain levers, you could affect other people negatively. So, Madam President, this legislation or this legislation is about modernizing. This legislation is about creating and putting the springboard for equity. Right? And people talk about, yes, not people, so some of my senators have spoken about the fact that this was passed in 1940, and therefore work wasn't done before. Right? And we're trying to do work now that wasn't done before. Madam President, I wasn't around in 1940. Right? I'm not that old. And therefore, I'm about doing the work now. You know, I'm not about going back and talk over the last 30 years who was in power, who wasn't in power, and how many times the government changed, and how many and who was in power and why they didn't do. And I don't want to get down in that. All right? We have a country to fix. We have a country to fix. We have to put things in place. We have to modernize our country. We cannot continue how we've been going. I have been on record talking about, we talk about efficiency, we talk about fixing our utilities, we talk about fixing a number of areas, and there's been a lot of talk. I am also on record that talks about legislation, and never perfect. We can't get every single thing right. But what we could do is to try to play our role here in setting the conversation right and trying to do the best that we can. So I stand in support of this legislation because I think it is good legislation. I stand for support of this legislation because it is in keeping with our philosophy of sharing the burden of adjustment. It attempts to make sure that this sets the springboard, that will allow for us to value properties in a better, everyone wants a role, a proper valuation system in place that will allow for us to go forward. I've heard people mention about whether or not average value or rentable value should be the rate that it should be used or other places. While I was in Barbados, like you, in Barbados, they choose not to use what we are using here. But I could tell you, the conversation at that time for the same little old lady who was living on the West Coast and had a house, all right? And of course, you know, the charm of Barbados is that you have tourism, you have big hotels next to people who choose not to sell. And if you use the value, just the straight value, whether you have a little old house on a property that just sold for $5 million US, what is the value of your land and your house? Now, you have no intention to want to sell it, but you have a big valuation. And that same little old lady who chose not to sell it, if you use other approaches, and they were arguing then in that house that will result in a high valuation because you are living. Whereas if you use this method and you have no intentions, a little old house, nobody wants to rent it, the tourists really wouldn't. So the value you prescribe on it because you are living there and you are renting it. And therefore, this is the reason why this approach was being used there or was being put forward by some members to be used there rather than this. I say that to mean that we could pick this one and have problems, pick that one, right? But as leaders, we have to give direction. We have to do what is right. And this legislation attempts to do that. It attempts to do what is right. It attempts to implement something that is needed in this country at this point in time, and it attempts to modernize what it is that we are doing and harmonize what we are doing. And again, as I said before, in keeping with our philosophy as a government in spreading the burden of adjustment during these difficult times. With these few words, Madam President, I support this and I thank you and the audience for listening. Thank you.
Senator Baig.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm extremely honored to be in this House yet again, and I would like to thank colleagues for their warm welcome to this House, and as well I would like to also thank the Leader of the Opposition for giving me this chance again. Madam President, before I go into the meat of my discourse today, I think it is only proper that I have some responses. Senator Hunte, you went down a road where you were saying that we're not here to get into the game of fighting or saying who is to blame or who's not to blame. But then you went down that road and you were saying that we are here today over financial issues because of reckless spending of that of the previous administration. But I want to remind Senator Hunte that it was the past administration who gave this country a sporting complex in Couva. It is this past administration that gave this country a children's hospital that you refuse to open. It is this past administration that ensured that a lot of things you can see with the spending of the people's money. But we are not seeing what the government is doing with the people's money. But we can see what has been happening with golf courses. We can see what has been happening with AV drilling. We are seeing what is happening with that of the Casabon paintings. That is wasted spending. Maybe that is why, romping as well. Maybe that is why the government has come today to deal with the issue of looking to tax the people of this country. The poor man is facing the brunt because of bad mismanagement by the People's National Movement led by Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister. Senator Hunte, you also made mention that a person who is living in a one-house bedroom, a pensioner, is making little bit of money. Apparently, he thinks that 1.5 million people of our country, some of those pensioners are only living there. But in fact, what about those other persons who are living in other type of houses with other rooms and more rooms? Wouldn't they have more monies to spend? Big families, they won't have to spend the amount of money you were saying. But also, I would like to remind you, Senator Hunt, in 2009, you weren't here. In 2009, I think you were in the banking system.
May I just interrupt you and ask you to speak to me? You address a senator through the presiding officer, but there's also something else. I want just members, I'm sorry, but have a look at Standing Order 46.5. And it says ministers shall be referred to by the title of their appointment. So it's the minister and then the others are senators. Thanks.
Guided, ma'am. I am guided. My apologies. Madam President, the minister has to also remember in 2009, his now Prime Minister, who was not Prime Minister then, said that $100 was important to the normal poor man in this country. And $100 is hard to release. But now we're in 2018, I guess the Prime Minister sees $100 as nothing, Madam President. Madam President, I am today going to go to many of these clauses here. But I am also, I think I need as well, as I am also an attorney at law in profession. I'm only 7 years old. I'm relatively young in the profession. And I was hoping today that the Attorney General would have come today and as well as would have edified me as a young attorney about some matters that we are hearing here today. I was hearing him making mention of a lot of tribunals, various tribunals in the TNTEC Act, etc. But I'm going to come to that with other parts here, wherein which we must understand that we have come to a crossroads, Madam President, wherein which you're looking to appoint persons in the land valuation. And these are persons who are going to be appointed by a minister, because they're looking to amend it by replacing president. So if I may look at the parent legislation, ma'am, right, under Section 9, subsection 2, it says, fresh valuation shall take effect on a date fixed by order of the president. I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to stop there. So they come now and they're taking out president and they're putting minister. Madam President, that is dangerous. Madam President, that is in fact trampling on separation of powers. We must not forget men like Lord Wolfe. We must not forget men like Lord Denning, who talked about making sure that such principles are kept in line. Madam President, the AG went all over and talked about all we have these so-called tribunals. But you know what's the one tribunal he failed to talk about, which is in his own ministry, Madam President, is that there's a court in the Intellectual Property Office, which is headed by the controller of the Intellectual Property Office. And that person is appointed by the Judicial Legal Services Commission, not by the Attorney General, you know. I find it very strange, Madam President, that he did not mention that here in this house. You know why he wouldn't do that? Because he's not going to embarrass himself or even his government, Madam President. So I found that to be very, very disingenuous. To come here and to do that and to mislead the public.
We careful in how you are presenting your arguments. Remember the standing orders, okay?
Madam President, I am guided. I do apologize. But, Madam President, they cannot come and mislead the House like that. But I understand. I am guided. I am guided.
If you're guided, you know, because ruling, okay? So I'm going to ask you once again, be very careful as you proceed. Thank you.
Yes. I move on, Madam President. Madam President, if we look at the bill, if we look at in which clause 4 is dealt with, under section 5, you're seeing where under part B, where you're dealing with A, site value and improved values, B, annual rental value, and C, where necessary, the capital value. Now, Madam President, when we look at A, where site value and improved values, now, really and truly, that's a bit punitive to me. Madam President, also, are you then, is the government telling us, and maybe the minister could guide me here, is that improved values, is this where now people who have looked to improve themselves with their properties, is it that then you are not punishing the public for improving themselves with their properties? Maybe an extension somewhere, or they're putting an extra bedroom, or maybe an extra bathroom. Because, Madam President, we as a people, we like to feel like we're good in our homes. We may see that there's a need for an extension here or there. So I'm asking if someone in the government could tell me, is that a way of punishing the people? And as a government, they should not punish the people for wanting to improve themselves. When we look at part B with discretionary or annual rental value, well, that's discretional. Annual rental value in one area may be different to another area in the country. So again, I have questions being asked here. Why would you look at that? So maybe if someone on the other side could answer that for me. And also is that where you look at the whole issue of when persons have to now come where necessary, the capital value. Now, capital value is what exactly? What is that? I would like to know. Is there an issue of potential biasness could come in with that? Where if a person has to come and do evaluation, and they come to the so-called evaluation committee or commission, they may say, well, how you valued your property as X, they may see it as Y. And that may be seen as biasness. So I am asking if the government can help me by telling me, well, what this is about. And the reason why I'm saying that, Madam President, is because I am here not only speaking for myself. I am speaking here for people of a northeast region of this country who does not have a voice. Because there was in the other house, other persons didn't get a chance to speak. So I am here speaking on their behalf. Because there are questions when I go to constituencies like Toko Sangre Grande, in St. Joseph, St. Augustine, people are asking these questions. And if I can't answer these questions, what can I do? That is why this government must answer these questions for the people of the country. That means, Madam President, that there was no proper consultations with the nation. There was no proper consultation with the people of this country, Madam President. Madam President, I move on. There's the issue about the valuations committee being appointed by a minister, and if there's an issue with the minister doing that, apparently they're saying that there's no issue with that. But I am sorry that it is an issue. Because what if a member of that committee and the minister falls out in the morning? Does that member of the committee be suspended from the committee, as they're saying here? If they come to the tribunal and he sees something like, say, conscience hit him and he realizes that a person's valuation is proper, but the others are saying, no, it's not. And he comes with a conscience vote on that commission and said, no, I believe these people. Does the minister then say, hey, you are causing a problem, you must go? No, that can't happen, Madam President. Then that shows again the tentacles of politicians coming into tribunals. And, Madam President, I will repeat it again, that is dangerous and we must not allow it. Madam President, I wish to also move on to some other clauses. Madam President, I believe it was Senator Dhanayshar Mahabir who raised the issue under 25(2)A, where a chairperson who is an attorney at law is being appointed. I want to share the view that he's raised. A person who is 10 years at the bar is being seen to be a proper person. But 10 years at the bar, at what field? And I want to agree with him. Is it a criminal attorney? I'm a criminal attorney. I study criminal law. I practice criminal. I also practice intellectual property. So when I make 10 years, does that make me qualified now to be a part of this tribunal? So what kind of lawyer are we going to put here? What if it's a person who's of maritime law, who understands the law of the sea, but he sees himself as 10 years qualified? So that is very vague. And we must be very careful when we come to vague legislation to be brought into the parliament. I would have expected that the Attorney General would have advised in some way or somehow with this. But I can't say further than that. And as you can see, Madam President, I understand legal drafting. I would have done legal drafting. So the government needs to understand that this is a very complex section. It's very vague. So it leads to too many questions. I think Senator Roach himself raised it as well. So it's not only from the opposition bench has raised it. It's those who are independent thinkers. So I have to ask the government that they must pay attention to that. That is very, very, very troublesome to me. Also, I heard Minister Hunte talked about, well, the tribunal will sit, there will be a ruling, and if you have a problem with the ruling, Madam President, they can go to the High Court. They can go higher and higher and higher. But Madam President, does that make it fair? Does that make it right? The answer to that is no. The answer to that really and truly is no. Because I will come back again to the court of the IPO, where yes, it's a quasi-court, which is ruled, and they will give a ruling, but it's a ruling of a person who is truly independent of any politician. So when they make their ruling and it goes higher, if a person decides to go against it, and there's a very famous case with that, which is known as the JAPS case. So, Madam President, we have to be very careful with these things, because the nation is listening to us, where they say, well, anybody could come. You don't like the ruling? We'll go to the court. Well, that's easily said and done, Madam President. That's easily said and done. Because if you decide to go to the court, Madam President, three things must come into play. One, that person must decide to get a lawyer. Two, that person must decide to have the money to pay a lawyer. And then three, that person must be willing to take this matter all the way to the end. Because we know how sometimes matters can go at the court. It can take a month, a year, or even some more years. So, Madam President, it's easy to say these things, you know. And I speak from my own experience, where you have to go before the courts. And I'm also very disturbed when I'm hearing these things from the government side. But that's all the people could do. But if you're thinking that's all the people could do, then why do it like this? Why not go to the people and meet with them first and discuss it with them if they are willing to do things like this? Where was the consultations? This government, even in its previous incarnations, they talk about doing work for the people, working for the people. But when they bring the legislation here, it is not people-friendly. Oh gosh. It is not for the poor man. Because the poor man, Madam President, I can tell you right now, I have people right now, Madam President, who cannot afford legal fees. So out of my own heart, I just say, listen, we will do it for free. He's a good man. I do try. Madam President, we must always look at what the poor man, the man on the Clapham bus, the man who's riding the Coco Benz bicycle. These are the people of this country we must also consider, not the persons who are in yachts or in high-rise homes. Those are not the only people. You know why, Madam President? Because I heard Minister Hunte talk about $5,000. Madam President, $5,000 for some people can't even be a month's salary for them. Because some people, they're under that. Madam President, we are also hearing the $500 was what? That's nothing? That was nothing. $500 to some people is to buy books for the children, Madam President. $500 is to ensure that they have a roof on their heads. As much as you all don't know, but there are a lot of poor people in this country. There are poor people who are in serious need of help. So instead of looking to tax the people, try and look and help the people of this country. As you would have heard my Senator Hussein talked about the issue of a baby grant. You all scoffed and laughed at it and removed it. So, Madam President, when we look at these things and we talk about, that's nothing. So what? Who cares, Madam President? $500 is nothing. But I can tell you, Madam President, up to 2 days ago, I was in Sangre Grande meeting with some people, talking about this, preparing to come here. And you know what they told me? And I said, well, you know, there's a fine of $5,000 now. They said, you know what they told me? They said, Mr. Baig, Madam President, they said, Mr. Baig, I can't even pay a ticket for $500. I will pay $5,000. So, Madam President, the government has to have a heart. They must look into themselves. To thine own self be true. And if to thine own self you cannot be true, then I suggest that the government needs to re-look at this legislation and re-look at it now. They must look at it. Madam President, this is a forerunner to the coming of the property tax. And we all know it's a dreaded word to hear. The P&M, Madam President, it's a dreaded word for them to hear because it was the property tax, and I will echo the statement that was made, that took them out of office. So it seems as though the government led by Dr. Keith Rowley, Madam President, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, is ready to come out of office. So, Madam President, these are things that they have to look at. These are things that they must realize of what is going on. Madam President, I want to look at 25G. With the Valuation Tribunal, Madam Minister, someone was pointing to the bill. Madam President, someone was pointing to say if I was coming back. So I'm showing I'm coming back. Right? The Valuation Tribunal shall hear all appeals raised under the Act or any other written law in respect of the decisions of the Commissioner. Now, I like the fact that they respect that there's going to be the Commissioner still. Thank God there's still some form of independence being left still, Madam President. B, take all steps that is considered reasonable and equitable in circumstances to effect an amicable settlement of an objection that is subject to a proceeding and may adjourn a proceeding at any stage to enable that parties to negotiate for that purpose. Now, Madam President, they say it here. But again, you have a tribunal who's been appointed by a minister. So what if that minister realizes that something has come up? What is stopping that minister, Madam President, to talking to the chairman of that tribunal and say, listen, you see this objection that has come? I don't want you to take on that person. What is stopping that true chairman from being a true independent person? Is he really and truly going to be independent? That is why, Madam President, I believe the Judicial and Legal Services Commission should have played a major role with being consulted in this bill. I don't know if they have been consulted. Because if I am a chairman, Madam President, if I am a chairman, I will realize that someone has come and opposed an evaluation, and the evaluation is true. And I, in my own heart, my heart has started to beat for them and bleed for them. What is stopping that minister who is draconian in thinking, heartless in thinking? I'm not saying any of them are here, Madam President. I am not saying that. I hope no one says I'm saying that here. But what is stopping a minister who thinks like that and tells that chairman, are we hoping that chairman has the gumption to tell that minister, go back upstairs in your office, let me do my job in independence. Can we expect that, Madam President? I am afraid I don't think we will see that. Not with what we've been seeing of late, been happening of late. So I'm a bit concerned with that, Madam President. So I'm asking that the government needs to look at that. that again, we have a lot of commissions who are independent who can help with this. And again, the JLSC must be looked at. Members of the government, I am asking you here and now, remove this bill and go back and meet with people, meet with the people, meet with the people. We are not saying we serve the people, but I am saying to you all, go there and meet with the people. And if you think the people I mean is only the mere man only, no, don't get me wrong. You have agencies to go to. Has even the law of association of this country been consulted with this bill? I will wait to hear from that. I don't think the law association itself has been heard. I am a member of the law association, and my association has not said anything on this with these consultations. So I am a bit disturbed with that, very disturbed. Madam President, I want to go back again to the bill. Going back again. So we're looking again under 25G, subsection 3. The Valuation Tribunal may on its own initiative or on the application of a party refer a question of law arising a proceeding before it for the determination of the High Court. And 4. Where questioning of law arising out of proceeding is referred to the High Court, the Valuation Tribunal shall not make a decision to which the question is relevant until the question is determined by the High Court, or B, proceed in a manner and make a decision that is inconsistent with the determination of the question by the High Court. So, Madam President, all this would be just here and here is legislative fluff, as we call it, Madam President, for people who do legislative drafting. This basically is saying when the tribunal don't understand something here, go to the High Court. Go to the High Court and hold. Then you are wasting time here. This is precious time being wasted, Madam President. Instead of it doing here, well, here what? Why not just go to the court first of all and forget the tribunal? Why not do that? But you're wasting proper time, Madam President, because you're then going to hold on it, send it up to the High Court, and then hope, well, let's hear something from them, you'll hold on it. And then who's suffering from that? Who's suffering from that? It's the people who have to wait for that valuation. Because then they have to now go to the High Court, hope to hear something from there, and then go back. If I throw it out to the government, say and tell me if this is something that is different to what I am saying. Because we have seen this before, Madam President. We have seen these things before. So we must be careful where you want to just put things in legislation because it sounds good. But when in fact it really sounds really bad. Legislatively it sounds bad, and legally it sounds bad, Madam President. Madam President, I move on. How much more time do I have? Madam President, how much more time do I have?
I have until 4:52.
Oh, thank you. Madam President. Madam President. Yes, thank you.
You have 16 precious minutes.
Yes, thank you. Madam President, we look at again, there are some more things to look at. If we look at the schedule, Madam President, I know many members talked about the schedule, but for me, the schedule it reeks of personal information that is coming out, I don't think needs to be put here. Madam President, if you look at Schedule 2, where it says, under number 2, under General, 2E, what is the registered deed or certificate of title registration? Oh, Madam President, I'm going to be very honest with you, Madam President. If I am a man who is not of right thinking, now when I say right thinking, I mean a person who is of the normal man on the Clapham bus, and the first thing he sees here, what is your deed? Madam President, there are people who hold on to those documents for mere life. Because a deed is something important to people. A deed is something that shows that this is their property, that this is their ownership. So if they come to put this number here, you could imagine, Madam President, we have had instances of persons losing their deeds. Because how? Due to some fraud, a person is able to get a deed number. How do we know that a person who's putting their deed number here is truly protected? How do we know that? Is the Land Registry Department of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, are they going to make sure that people's deeds are properly protected? So, Madam President, I have a problem with this. Because if I had to see this, I was in two minds to put it. I would have been very afraid. I would have been scared of my life to put this. I would have been scared. Because again, you have people who are in their 90s, in their 80s, in their 70s, who have lived all their life with their property. There are some people who now may have just gotten their deeds, who waited all of their lives through their grandparents, their parents, and now them, and they've gotten it to now come and have to put that here. Right? A deed number. Right. I'm going to come to that. Thank you, Senator. I will say this, Madam President. Even you're putting a deed number, you're still putting the deed number, Madam President?
Senator, can I ask you, please? I'm hearing you. And so could you just lower your tone a little bit? Thank you. Passion notwithstanding, please lower your tone. Thank you.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, forgive me. That's the advocate voice in me. My apologies. Because as a court advocate, Madam President, sometimes you have to let the voice be heard. Speak from the diaphragm. So my apologies, Madam President. I'm sorry. And I notice the way I'm speaking, it is irritating others because the truth hurts. And the truth will also feel in their bodies. So, Madam President, a deed number is still a deed number. Because we have to understand, Madam President, that man's own worst enemy is man. You understand what I'm saying, Madam President? So if I put that there, uncle at Chacha, come and put that. You know what Chacha is, right? Right. Goes and put that there. He has to be of the awareness that nothing is going to happen to him. And he doesn't have one day decided, I'm going to file, and somebody else have a same deed number as him. And those of you who don't practice in the courts, that happens. That happens. That happens, Madam President. So we must be the guardians of people, because you need to be dealing with people's property. And when we are interfering with the rights of people's property, Madam President, we must come proper, we must come correct, and we must come right. We must, Madam President. Because at the end of the day, what else do we have but our property to give to our children and our children's children, Madam President? There are some people today who don't have that. They don't have that. Madam President, if I may continue, and we're looking again, where they go for and number 3, residential and building rentals. Now again, Madam President, if a man who is not renting, has to come and look at these things, this is not needed, this is not necessary. So is he going to put NA? Has people been told how to go through these forms at all? Has the government gone on a public awareness? Or are they waiting for it to come to the parliament and then, Madam President, it pass through the parliament and then it goes out there? And then go one day on TV and some member of the government talk and go through all of this. But not everybody will see them. So have they done that? Has the Ministry of Finance done that? I hope the minister could answer me on that.
Senator, you have 10 more minutes. And I want to give you a little advice because you're starting now to repeat a lot of what you said earlier. So I need for you, if either, you bring your points together and you move on to new points. Okay? All right? So you have 10 more minutes.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, I will also go to another part of the bill. I'm leaving the schedule now. In which the government gave a definition to that of owner. So, Madam President, in definitions, we have dictionary meaning, and we have the legal. So, Madam President, under Section 3.4, it says by owner includes the owner or occupier of any land or the receiver, attorney, agent, manager, guardian, or committee or committee of any such owner or occupier of such other persons in charge or having the control of possession of any land in the right of the owner or having the possession of his or her own right as a guardian of any person of such land. So, Madam President, I believe that this definition has been seen as a catch-it-all to put in everybody. But when you look at the legal definition of owner, I want to say it. It means entity that has an enforceable claim or title to an asset or property and recognized as such by law. So, Madam President, I've just told you what the legal definition of our owner is, and this so-called definition of what owner is, Madam President. Madam President, this definition has a lot of problems here. Because I want to also tell you, Madam President, that there are persons who hold something called a COC, Certificates of Comfort. Those persons are not real owners, but they are occupiers. So you're throwing them under this legislation? Madam President, to me, that is heartless. Because a person who has a COC, they have to go through a lot of problems to first get that done. And then you have some people who are seen as squatters. So, Madam President, are squatters being put in this? So I ask the government here, is a squatter being now seen as an owner? Because they are seen as an occupier on land. So this definition has me very worried, Madam President. Because if this becomes law, what about tenants, renters? Do they fall under this as well? Because I'm not seeing anything about real renters, but a renter is a person who is in occupation. So again, the vagueness, Madam President, too many questions being asked in legislation. And that's not supposed to happen in legislation. You're not supposed to have too many questions. Because at the end of the day, legislation must be done so everybody, from the man at the top to the man at the bottom, can understand it.
Definitely.
And with legislation, there must also be some form of fairness and equity. And in this legislation, Madam President, I am not seeing fairness, and I am not seeing any real form of equity. I'm not seeing it, Madam President. Madam President, I listened as well. The AG talked about a lot of things. But in all of this, Madam President, this deals with ownership of property. And property, Madam President, is something we must not play with. Because someone said here earlier, you play with someone's property, you're playing with lives. And we don't want that to happen here, Madam President. Madam President, with these few words, I want to tell the government of Trinidad and Tobago that it is time that you get your act together. It is time that you put the priorities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago first. It is time that the people, the poor man, be looked at. It is time, and really and truly, not only a significant section of the society must be looked at. And I want to also echo the calls of my colleagues, and I want to say that it is time, Madam President, that this bill be forthwith and removed immediately. Madam President, with these few words, I say thank you.
Senator Creese.
Thank you, Madam President, for permitting me to rise to speak on the bill and act to amend the Valuation of Land Act. I want to begin by referencing my old neighbor, Faizabad resident, Minister Hunte, in his reference to old age pensioners and their receipt from his government of $3,500, because I find it is indicative of the lack of a coherent, overarching philosophy that should guide this bill and the other related bills dealing with the whole property tax issue, because I left school in 1972 and started to work, and I think that's the year NIS came out. So I've been on the NIS system ever since until my retirement. And NIS pays me $3,000, not $3,500. So for working all those years, I'm rewarded with I'm paying contributions, I'm rewarded with $3,000. And the old age pensioners, whether they worked or not, they get more than me. So it's that lack of a philosophy of equity and fair play and just reward that undermines some of the seemingly good efforts, but they say the part, that place is paved with good intentions. So I'm not doubting their intentions or imputing improper motives. I'm merely assessing the consequences. And it's in this sense the lack of a perspective on valuations, of a base theory on valuations, has led to this mismatch that Senator Sri could soon refer to, of the competing approaches to land valuation emerging in different aspects of the bill. And therefore, at the end of the day, creating more confusion than resolution. And that, to me, is a concern. And it's that failure to have, a set of core policies and philosophies that keeps tripping up this regime. It came out, too, with the Attorney General's presentation with respect to his citations of comparative situations, as he claimed, where tribunals are being appointed or are due to be appointed by ministers as opposed to presidents or the office of the president. And of course, he referred in that regard to the Psychiatric Tribunal under the Mental Health Act, the Emergency Ambulances Services Act, the Civil Aviation Act. And while he was listing these off, my mind was actually running on the National Lotteries Control Board. Because in the case of the National Lotteries Control Board, which is in fact a regulatory authority, they in fact operate a lottery. And to me, that's a conflict of interest in terms of the separation of powers. So the whole question of what should fall to the office of the president and what should fall to the executive is up for debate, and is obviously exposing that there isn't a grounded philosophy, a clear perspective guiding how legislation is drafted, how legislation is shaped. Good? Because here you have a regulatory body actually presiding over its competitors. Because to have an ad that has some kind of lottery or raffle in it, you have to apply to NLCB. So, again, there's a need for a clear, well-thought-out philosophy that should guide legislation, and particularly pieces of legislation like this. The other thing that I found quite striking in all of this, again dealing with the whole question of a well-thought-out and rigorous and robust policy position, comes up on the question of fines or fees. And, at Section 5, on the whole reference to deleting the word 100 and substituting the word 1,000, the debate on how we should structure fines, what should guide us. And to me, that came up in the anti-gang legislation, which we recently discussed, and the question of the $20 million or $25 million fines and so on, and what makes a fine appropriate. To me, we need to get to the point where we have a core philosophy on fines. Is it that fines are to be related to the value of the business that we are in or to the level of income that we make? And in the case of possible criminal activity or perceived wrongdoing as per some legislation, what should be the nexus? What should it be grounded on? And even then with the anti-gang bill, my point of view, it should be linked to an estimate of the revenue or the worth of the activity that you're involved in, and not just a blanket fine. And I would take that from traffic fines all the way up to anti-gang legislation, or in the case of this, fines related to, wrongdoing or any offenses under this act even. Because to me, if we are saying that somebody has a property, worth under $250,000, which would be what most of the poorer segment of our society would reside in, how should a fine for whatever offense they commit under this act should be based as opposed to someone living in a 10 million, 15 million condominium or resort style domicile? So I think so many years, 60 plus years after independence, we ought to have reached the place where there is consensus on what our fee and fine structure should be, so that it consistently makes sense and that we aren't charging one person 25 million who's engaged in gaming and making that over a long weekend, and charging the same fine to somebody who pulling bull or selling doubles or selling sweeties around the corner. We ought to, by this time, come to a more mature perspective on the issue of how we are charging fees and or fines. But there's a bigger connection between the two situations, the anti-gang bill and this. Because I don't know whether people realize that for much of the 80s and into the 90s, the whole question of land valuation and property development and the rewards, the incomes generated as a result of property development, how fairly, how equitably those proceeds were taxed. And as someone who worked in the local government sector, I came face to face with abandoned developments. So that people would have made their money, they would have enhanced the value of properties and would have gone off into the sunset and left people with incomplete sewer systems and questionable road and irrigation and drainage systems in developments. Good? And no fines or no, consequences came to them. And whether the valuation systems that we are now going to utilize at the core of this bill is in fact now finding the residents of those questionable developments that look well, but have issues that need to be resolved in some aspect of the state's bureaucracy in terms of those failed drainage systems, those failed sewer systems that are still existing in those developments that we are now going to revalue or upgrade, and whether in fact in some instances they should be devalued, taken down, given what if any buyer who was aware, and they say buyer beware, any buyer who's truly aware of what transpired in those developments would really pay for it. So that at the base of this, there is the whole question of having a clear and well thought out perspective on approaches to land valuation, and recognizing that in the anti-gang legislation, we left out those gangs of land developers who were quite successful in separating people from their money without giving them fair value. The other thing that struck me in going through this and was the question that we are all asserting, listen, if there is this tribunal, and quite frankly, I'm of the view that the tribunal should be appointed by the office of the president. Not that I am questioning that we may not from time to time have ministers of balance, but I feel that once we are speaking in terms of jurisprudence, and we are recognizing the possibilities that...
Creese, Senator Creese. Honourable Senators, at this stage we will suspend and we will return at 5:30.